Today, the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments about the legality of President Donald Trump's attempted firing of U.S. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Trump tried to fire her back in August over alleged mortgage fraud, which Cook denies. But a judge later ruled that does not qualify as cause for her termination under the Federal Reserve Act. The case raises some high-stakes questions about the extent of Donald Trump's executive power to remove people from independent and apolitical roles like the Federal Reserve. NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach is following the case for us from our D.C. bureau. Gary, just lay out the facts of both sides of the case here. What have we heard so far during today's oral arguments?
Yeah, the arguments just wrapped up, and the justices do appear skeptical of the president's ability to fire Lisa Cook based on these allegations of mortgage fraud. Of course, they won't make a decision until June, but Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh was talking about the big picture here, saying, quote, what goes around comes around, saying that if they allow this to happen with the evidence or lack thereof that exists of the mortgage fraud here, just in a few years when a Democratic president is in place, they could do the same thing, and saying its history could repeat itself here and not in a favorable way. Justice Barrett also asking why a meeting with the president wouldn't be possible for Lisa Cook just to get some of that due process that Lisa Cook is legally owed. Why that wouldn't be possible. John Sauer, the Solicitor General who was defending the Trump administration in this case, not really having any strong arguments as to why a meeting with President Trump wouldn't have been possible, where he could have laid out some of that evidence for Lisa Cook. And then the Solicitor General, John Sauer, wrapped up his arguments not with a legal theory, but by saying the justices should think of what the message this sends to the American people. Take a listen.
Any other court should look at this and say, this is likely not cause. That sends the wrong message to the markets. It sends the wrong message to the American people who have to make correct representations to their banks when they're getting their mortgage interest rates.
And there were a couple of notable people in the audience today, including Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, and the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Morgan?
You know, speaking of which, the Federal Reserve Act essentially restricts presidents from removing federal governors, Fed governors, unless there is evidence of wrongdoing. So how are the justices likely to interpret that? I mean, the standard of wrongdoing in this particular case.
Well, that was actually one of the issues that Associate Justice Amy Coney Barrett brought up, saying, is the crime, what is the level and nature of the crime? She said, this isn't murder. It was something she said, right? So does the nature of the crime really matter here? And of course, when it happened also matters, right? The allegations here of mortgage fraud, which NBC News has not been able to fully corroborate what the president has been saying here, is that she was doing this before she was actually appointed to the position in 2022. So this would be pre her time in office, something that Amy Coney Barrett found also very interesting, Morgan.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.